Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a tale so peculiar, so drenched in luxury, it might just lull you into the deepest sleep imaginable. Imagine, if you will, the softest fabric known to the ancient world, slipping over your skin, cool and smooth. Now picture yourself, not just wearing a little of it, but absolutely drowning in it, from dawn till dusk, every single day. You're living in a world of bustling markets, grand amphitheaters, and formidable legions. But your primary concern is the next delivery of shimmering threads from a land you can barely conceive of. You're an emperor, an absolute ruler, yet your greatest passion is a wardrobe that would make even modern fashionistas blush. This isn't just about clothes. It's about power, perception, and a truly baffling obsession that sent shockwaves through the very heart of the Roman Empire. Trust me, you probably won't survive this one awake. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story, or rather, your story tonight, begins long before the emperor in question even drew his first breath. It starts with the very substance of his future obsession, silk. For the Romans, this wasn't just another fabric. It was a legend, a whispered luxury from the distant, mysterious East. You see, the Roman Empire, vast and powerful as it was, didn't produce silk. Oh no, that secret was closely guarded in a land they vaguely knew as Serica, the land of silk. This meant that every single thread, every precious bolt of fabric, had to undertake an epic journey, a trek across continents, through treacherous mountains and scorching deserts, a trip that could take months, even years. It was an exclusive club, this silk ownership, a clear sign of immense wealth and status. When the first whispers of this extraordinary material reached Rome, perhaps carried by Parthian traders or exotic emissaries, it must have seemed almost mythical. The texture, unlike anything they had ever felt, so soft, so light, yet surprisingly strong, immediately captivated the elite. Imagine the shock and delight when a senator, accustomed to rough wool or sturdy linen, first felt the cool embrace of silk. It was a game-changer, a textile revolution for the ultra-rich. Historians still argue whether the Romans initially believed silk grew on trees or if they had a more accurate, albeit vague, understanding of its insect origins. What's certain is that its scarcity made it astronomically expensive, limiting its use to the very highest echelons of society. We're talking about the truly wealthy here, the ones who could afford to literally wear their fortunes. A single silk garment could cost more than a legionary's annual wage, perhaps even several years' wages. This wasn't fast fashion, my friends. This was slow, incredibly deliberate, and obscenely pricey fashion. You weren't just buying a tunic. You were buying a statement, a declaration of your place at the very apex of Roman society. Think of it like owning a private jet today, but one that took 2 years to get delivered and might get ambushed by bandits on the way. The allure, of course, was irresistible. The sheen, the drape, the way it caught the light, it was simply unparalleled. And for emperors, who always sought to distinguish themselves from the common folk, silk became an almost inevitable accessory. It was the ultimate flex, long before anyone even knew what a flex was. The stage was being set for a rather peculiar chapter in Roman history, where one emperor would take this imperial indulgence to an entirely new, almost ludicrous, level. You can almost feel the softness, can't you? Like a cloud against your skin, a very, very expensive cloud. So, you've got this incredible fabric, this symbol of ultimate luxury, making its way across vast, untamed landscapes. The journey of silk from its origins in the distant East to the sophisticated salons of Rome wasn't just a trade route. It was an epic saga in itself, known to history as the Silk Road. Imagine, if you will, the vastness of that undertaking. You're not just popping down to the local fabric store, you're coordinating an international expedition. Caravans, laden with precious goods, including those coveted silk bales, would set out from the ancient Chinese capital of Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an. From there, they'd traverse thousands upon thousands of miles. Think about that for a second. A journey so long, so fraught with peril that few individuals would ever complete the entire route from end to end. Instead, it was a relay race, with goods changing hands multiple times across different cultures and empires. You'd pass through the arid deserts of Central Asia, where the sun beat down relentlessly and sandstorms could appear out of nowhere, swallowing entire caravans. Then, you'd navigate the towering, icy peaks of the Pamir Mountains, often called the roof of the world, where a single wrong step could send you plummeting into a frozen abyss. After that, perhaps through the bustling markets of Persia, where the silk might be dyed and repackaged, adding another layer of exoticism and value. Each stop, each exchange, inflated the price, making that final Roman tunic or toga even more ridiculously expensive. It wasn't just the physical dangers. There were bandits, warring tribes, and the ever-present threat of disease. No wonder a single bolt of silk was worth its weight in gold, sometimes more. It wasn't just beautiful, it had literally survived an odyssey. The Romans, by and large, didn't understand the intricacies of this global supply chain. They knew silk came from the East, that it was rare, and that it cost a fortune. For most, it remained an abstract concept, a dream fabric reserved for emperors and the unbelievably rich. Historians still argue about the exact volume of silk that reached Rome at any given time. Was it a trickle? A steady stream? What's certain is that it was never enough to satisfy the burgeoning appetite of the Roman elite for luxury. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from the Roman merchants, trying to meet demand for a product that was essentially coming from the other side of the known world, delivered by camels and donkeys. Think about the sheer audacity of it. In an age without modern logistics, without global positioning, without even reliable maps for much of the route, goods moved across continents. The Silk Road wasn't a single paved highway. It was a network of trails, trade posts, and temporary encampments. It was a testament to human ingenuity and greed. I mean, enterprise that such a fragile, valuable commodity could make its way. And yet it did. This enduring connection between East and West, driven primarily by the allure of silk, shaped economies, influenced cultures, and even led to diplomatic exchanges, however infrequent. The fabric, so light to the touch, carried the weight of empires and the dreams of distant lands on its delicate threads. It was the ultimate status symbol, and its journey was as epic as the empire that so craved it. Imagine the surprise of finding a camel hair still clinging to a silk bolt, thousands of miles from its origin. Now that's a journey. With such immense value attached to every silken thread, it was perhaps inevitable that the Roman state, ever keen on maintaining order and tradition, would eventually try to weigh in on the matter. And weigh in it did. You see, while silk was undeniably beautiful and a mark of supreme wealth, it also started raising eyebrows amongst the more conservative elements of Roman society. For many traditionalists, particularly those who harked back to the good old days of austere Roman virtues, this effeminate, flowing fabric was seen as a sign of moral decay, a dangerous foreign influence corrupting the stoic Roman character. This brings us to Tiberius's silk restrictions, a fascinating glimpse into the empire's struggle with luxury. You're watching this unfold, perhaps as a senator grumbling in the forum, or a stern matron tutoring as a young nobleman glides by in a semi-transparent silk garment. This was the early 1st century AD, and Emperor Tiberius, known for his rather grim and frugal demeanor, was not a fan of ostentatious displays, especially not those that hinted at softness or decadence. He saw silk, particularly when worn by men, as un-Roman. It was too revealing, too delicate, too nice. Rome was built on rough-and-tumble soldiers and no-nonsense politicians, not on dandies swathed in exotic finery. So, Tiberius, in his wisdom, decided to do something about it. He didn't ban silk outright. That would have been an economic nightmare and probably impossible to enforce given the insatiable demand. Instead, he attempted to discourage its use, particularly for men, and to regulate its cost through sumptuary laws. These laws were designed to control public displays of wealth and prevent what was perceived as excessive luxury. Imagine trying to tell the Kardashians they can't wear certain fabrics today. That's kind of the vibe. The intent was clear: rein in the extravagance, uphold Roman dignity, and maybe even conserve some of that precious Roman gold that was flowing out to buy this expensive foreign import. Historians still argue about the true effectiveness of Tiberius's sumptuary laws regarding silk. Did they really curb the appetite for it? Or did they just push its display further behind closed doors, making it an even more exclusive and desirable forbidden fruit? It's a bit like trying to stop the tide with a teacup, isn't it? The allure of silk was simply too strong, its status as a symbol of ultimate wealth too deeply ingrained. People would find ways around the rules, or simply pay the fines, because the prestige of wearing silk was worth it. You can almost picture the hushed conversations among the Roman elite, devising new ways to subtly incorporate silk into their attire without overtly breaking the spirit of the law, perhaps layering it under less scandalous fabrics. This period highlights a recurring theme in Roman history: the tension between traditional values and the intoxicating pull of new luxuries. On one hand, you have the stern moralists yearning for a simpler past. On the other, the powerful forces of trade, fashion, and human desire. Silk, in its soft, shimmering form, became a central battleground in this cultural clash. It demonstrated that even the most powerful empire in the world couldn't entirely dictate personal taste, especially when that taste was as alluring and universally coveted as a silk toga. It was a sign that Rome, for all its might, was increasingly becoming a cosmopolitan melting pot, susceptible to foreign influences, both good and, in the eyes of some, very, very bad. Despite the best efforts of emperors like Tiberius to put a damper on the silk craze, the lure of the shimmering fabric persisted, bubbling just beneath the surface of Roman society, waiting for an opportunity to burst forth. And burst forth it did, in a most spectacular and, frankly, baffling manner, with the arrival of the emperor who would truly embody the silk obsession. This brings us to the unlikely and rather scandalous Heliogabalus's ascent to power. You're now transported to a time of political intrigue, shifting loyalties, and a sense that anything, absolutely anything, could happen within the confines of the Roman imperial court. Our protagonist, or antagonist depending on your viewpoint, was born Varius of Vitus Bassianus in Syria around 203 AD. He wasn't a typical Roman noble, groomed for power in the marble halls of Rome. Oh no, his lineage was steeped in the exotic East. His family, the Severan dynasty, had recently seized control of the empire, but his grandmother, Julia Misa, and his mother, Julia Simius, were formidable Syrian women who wielded immense influence behind the scenes. This was a family deeply connected to the religious cult of Elagabal, a sun god worshipped in Emesa, Syria. And young Varius, from an early age, was consecrated as the high priest of this very god. Imagine that, a preteen boy, already a powerful religious figure, destined for a life of ceremonial duties, far from the machinations of Roman politics. However, fate, or perhaps his ambitious grandmother, had other plans. In 217 AD, the sitting emperor, Caracalla, Heliogabalus's cousin, was assassinated. The Praetorian prefect, Macrinus, seized the throne. But Macrinus was unpopular, seen as an outsider, and lacked the legitimate imperial connections. This was Julia Misa's cue. She saw an opportunity for her grandson. She spread rumors that Varius was actually Caracalla's illegitimate son, a lie, but a politically convenient one that appealed to the lingering loyalty many felt for the previous dynasty. You can almost hear the whispers echoing through the military camps. A true Severan heir lives. So, in 218 AD, this 14-year-old boy, Varius of Vitus Bassianus, was proclaimed emperor by the legions in Syria. It was a brazen move, a desperate gamble orchestrated by his grandmother. You're watching this boy, still very much a child, being thrust onto a stage of immense power and deadly politics. The existing emperor, Macrinus, marched to confront the usurper, but his troops, swayed by the propaganda and perhaps the promise of a younger, more charismatic leader, or at least one less loathed than Macrinus, deserted him. Macrinus was captured and executed. And just like that, almost overnight, the high priest of Elagabal, the boy who worshipped the sun god, became the ruler of the vast Roman Empire. He then adopted the name Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, but he would forever be known by the name of his god, Heliogabalus. Historians still argue about the extent of Heliogabalus's own agency in this ascent. Was he a naive puppet in the hands of his powerful female relatives, or did he possess a nascent understanding of the power he was seizing? What's certain is that his path to the throne was anything but conventional, setting the stage for an emperorship that would be defined by its unconventionality, its excess, and, most notably for our story tonight, an unprecedented love affair with silk. So there you are, a teenage emperor, plucked from the quiet, incense-filled temple of Elagabal and plopped onto the very volatile throne of the Roman Empire. It's quite the career change, isn't it? From priest to potentate, all thanks to an ambitious grandmother and a convenient lie about your paternity. And this sudden, dramatic shift in your life profoundly influenced your reign, specifically how you chose to present yourself and your beliefs to the Roman world. You see, your devotion to the sun god wasn't just a childhood pastime. It was the very core of your being, and this is where we delve into the peculiar reality of the sun god's priest-emperor. You arrive in Rome, a city steeped in its own ancient traditions, its pantheon of gods, and its deeply ingrained political customs. And what do? You don't try to blend in, not even a little bit. Instead, you immediately set about establishing your Syrian sun god, Elagabal, as the supreme deity of the Roman Empire. Imagine the shockwaves this sent through the Roman elite. For centuries, Jupiter Optimus Maximus had reigned supreme, the king of the gods, the protector of Rome. Now, a teenage emperor, an outsider, was declaring that his god, a foreign deity symbolized by a black conical stone, was the new top dog. It was like swapping out the entire starting lineup of a beloved sports team overnight, and then insisting that the new star player only wore silk. You, as Heliogabalus, were not just a worshiper, you were the high priest of Elagabal. This meant that religious ceremonies, often bizarre and lavish by Roman standards, became central to your imperial duties. You paraded the sacred black stone, the Beadle of Elagabal, through the streets of Rome, often personally leading the procession, clad in dazzling Eastern robes, which, you guessed it, were almost certainly made of silk. You built a magnificent temple for Elagabal on the Palatine Hill, right in the heart of imperial power, a structure designed to dwarf existing Roman shrines. There were sacrifices of bulls and sheep, which wasn't unusual for Roman religion, but there were also rumors, perhaps exaggerated by your enemies, of human sacrifices, further fueling Roman unease. Historians still argue about the sincerity of Heliogabalus's religious zeal versus the political motivations behind his promotion of Elagabal. Was it a genuine, fervent belief that his god was superior and would bring prosperity to Rome, or a calculated move to assert his authority and differentiate himself from previous emperors? Perhaps a bit of both. What's clear is that this religious devotion was inseparable from your identity as emperor. You weren't just a political ruler. You were the embodiment of your god on earth, a living conduit to divine power. This unique blend of imperial authority and priestly function was utterly alien to Roman sensibilities and contributed significantly to the growing unease with your reign. And what did a priest-emperor wear? Certainly not the sensible wool and linen preferred by your more traditional predecessors. Oh no, your wardrobe, as you might now anticipate, became an extension of your divine role, a visible manifestation of your connection to the exotic East and its radiant sun god. The stage was set, the unconventional emperor was in place, and the fabric that had once caused Tiberius so much consternation was about to become the defining, shimmering signature of your rule. It's almost as if you're trying to manifest sunshine in your clothes, even if the Roman public found it a bit much. Now, with your grand pronouncements about Elagabal and your decidedly un-Roman religious practices firmly established, it was time to make your mark visually. And how else would a priest-emperor devoted to a dazzling sun god manifest his radiance, but through his very clothing? This is where your personal preference, bordering on an absolute fixation, for silk truly exploded onto the Roman scene. We enter the world of imperial garb and silk's embrace, where you, Heliogabalus, became the emperor who only wore silk. You, dear listener, as Heliogabalus, were not just adopting silk for special occasions or for the occasional evening gala. Oh no, this was a full-blown, 24/7 commitment. From the moment you rose from your silken sheets in the morning, to your public appearances, your feasts, your religious ceremonies, and even your private moments, you were encased in silk. Imagine the texture against your skin, the subtle rustle as you moved, the way the light played across the fabric, making it shimmer with every gesture. For you, it wasn't just a garment. It was a second skin, a fluid extension of your imperial persona. This was a radical departure from Roman tradition. Roman emperors, even the most extravagant, typically favored fine wools and linens for their everyday attire, reserving more exotic materials for specific ceremonial purposes. The toga, the quintessential Roman garment, was usually made of heavy wool. But you, Heliogabalus, found wool stifling, traditional, and, let's be honest, probably a bit scratchy. You preferred the lightness, the fluidity, the sheer opulence of silk. You had tunics of shimmering white silk, togas dyed in vibrant purples and golds, cloaks interwoven with threads that caught the sun's rays and seemed to pulse with an inner light. It was a walking, talking, breathing advertisement for luxury. You demanded silk not just for your formal imperial robes, but also for your casual wear, if such a thing existed for an emperor. You probably had silken undergarments, silken sashes, silken footwear. Historians still argue about the precise details of your daily wardrobe, but the general consensus is that it was an unprecedented display of dedication to a single material. You loved the softness, the cool feel against your skin, a stark contrast to the often harsh realities of Roman imperial life. It was your personal comfort zone, wrapped around you in layers of expensive indulgence. Consider the logistics for a moment. To maintain such a wardrobe, you needed an almost continuous supply of this impossibly expensive material. Your imperial treasury, already strained, must have felt the pressure. Your courtiers, accustomed to procuring the finest Roman crafts, now had to scour the known world for more and more silk. It wasn't just about buying a few bolts. It was about sustaining an emperor's relentless, almost childlike, desire for his favorite fabric. And let's not forget the upkeep. Silk is delicate. You'd need an entire retinue of servants dedicated solely to cleaning, pressing, and repairing your silken collection. Imagine the laundresses, gently hand-washing your imperial garments, probably cursing under their breath about the sheer volume of it all. This wasn't just a fashion choice. It was an imperial declaration, a statement that you were above Roman norms, above Roman expectations, and certainly above Roman sartorial traditions. You were the Silk Emperor, and everyone was about to know it. So, you're the Roman citizen, going about your daily life, trying to ignore the increasingly eccentric pronouncements from the imperial palace. You're used to emperors being a bit odd, perhaps a little power-mad, but this new guy, Heliogabalus, takes the toga. And his silk obsession? Well, that was just another layer to the general bewildered and often scandalized public reaction to silk mania. You can almost hear the grumbling on the street corners, the hushed conversations in the bathhouses, and the outright ridicule in the more cynical corners of Rome. First, there was the sheer cost of it all. Romans, even the common folk, had a keen sense of value. They knew how much a bolt of silk cost, and they understood that the emperor was essentially hemorrhaging money on his wardrobe. This wasn't just a private eccentricity. It was perceived as fiscal irresponsibility on a grand scale. Every shimmering tunic Heliogabalus wore represented gold that could have been spent on public works, on the legions, or even on more bread and circuses. You'd hear people muttering, "There goes another year's salary on a single cloak." Then there was the aesthetic shock. Romans were accustomed to a certain gravitas in their leaders. They expected their emperor to embody Roman virtues, strength, dignity, and a certain austere seriousness. Silk, especially in the quantities Heliogabalus wore it, and in the flamboyant styles he favored, was seen as anything but dignified. It was perceived as effeminate, even decadent. Imagine your stern, no-nonsense leader suddenly showing up looking like he's about to attend a costume party sponsored by a silkworm. It just didn't compute. "He looks like a woman," was a common, damning accusation among the male populace, hitting at the very core of Roman masculinity. The sources from the time, though often biased by later Christian writers or political enemies, paint a vivid picture of public dismay. Dio Cassius, a contemporary historian, writes with barely disguised contempt about Heliogabalus's appearance and habits, often highlighting his softness and unmanly attire. You can feel the disdain dripping from the ancient texts. This wasn't just a fashion faux pas. It was seen as a betrayal of Roman identity. Here was an emperor who seemed to prefer the flowing robes of a foreign priest to the sturdy toga of a Roman statesman. It raised fundamental questions about his fitness to rule. Historians still argue about the extent to which Heliogabalus's silk obsession was a deliberate provocation versus a genuine personal preference that simply clashed with Roman norms. Was he trying to shock? Or did he just genuinely love the feel of silk? What's clear is that it contributed significantly to the perception of him as an emperor who was entirely out of touch with Roman values and traditions. It wasn't merely a quirky tidbit. It became a symbol of his perceived ineptitude and moral degradation. You might chuckle at the image now, but for a Roman citizen then, watching their emperor swan around in diaphanous fabrics while the empire faced very real threats, it was no laughing matter. It was a sign that things were, perhaps, unraveling. Much like a silk thread, if you pull it too hard. Beyond his personal wardrobe, your silk obsession, Heliogabalus, spilled over into every aspect of your imperial life, transforming even the most mundane events into spectacles of shimmering excess. Nowhere was this more evident than in your infamous banquets. Forget your average Roman dinner party. You hosted a different kind of soiree, one drenched in luxury, and often in the very fabric that defined your reign. We're now setting the scene for lavish banquets and silk decor, where even the food seemed to play second fiddle to the textile opulence. Imagine yourself as a guest, receiving an invitation to one of the emperor's nightly feasts. You're already prepared for something unusual, given Heliogabalus's reputation. But as you enter the dining hall, your jaw might literally drop. The walls aren't merely painted or adorned with tapestries. They're draped in vast swathes of richly colored silk. Purple, crimson, gold, fabrics cascading from the ceilings, shimmering under the lamplight. The dining couches, typically sturdy wooden affairs, are softened with cushions overflowing with silk stuffing and upholstered in the finest, smoothest silk brocades. You recline on silk, surrounded by silk. It's an almost suffocating sensory experience of pure, unadulterated luxury. And it didn't stop there. The servants, often chosen for their beauty, were probably dressed in silken tunics, moving like silent, graceful ghosts through the opulent scene. Even the napkins might have been silk, a detail that would have made any frugal Roman patrician faint on the spot. The very air you breathed seemed to be infused with the scent of exotic perfumes, wafting from silken diffusers. This wasn't just about dining. It was about creating an immersive environment, a dreamscape of indulgence, where silk was the predominant motif. You, as Heliogabalus, clearly reveled in this display. Historians still argue whether your banquets were merely hedonistic or had a deeper, perhaps even religious, significance, tying into your sun god's radiant splendor. What's certain is that they served as a clear statement of your limitless wealth and your disdain for conventional Roman moderation. There are accounts, perhaps exaggerated but illustrative, of exotic birds being released into the dining hall, only to be caught by attendants dressed in silk nets. Or of entire courses being served on plates made of precious metals, then discarded after a single use, just to demonstrate boundless extravagance. And for Heliogabalus, if it wasn't silk, it might as well not exist. It was the ultimate go big or go home approach to hospitality. Picture the scene as exotic dishes are brought out, peacocks served whole, dormice fattened for consumption, fish from distant seas. But your attention, even as a guest, would constantly be drawn back to the ubiquitous fabric. The way the light danced on a silken curtain, the soft brushing sound as a servant walked past, the luxurious feel of the silk beneath your arm. It was a multi-sensory assault of opulence, designed to overwhelm and impress, or perhaps simply to entertain the emperor who found his greatest joy not in conquest or governance, but in the soft, shimmering embrace of his favorite fabric. And as you settled in for the night, perhaps feeling a little queasy from the excess, you'd carry the lingering memory of silk everywhere. As you, the Roman citizen, observed the lavish displays of Heliogabalus's reign, from his personal silk wardrobe to his silk-draped banquets, A very practical and pressing question would naturally arise. Who was paying for all this? Because, my friend, this level of silk-saturated luxury had a monumental silk's economic impact on the Roman Empire. This wasn't just a matter of personal taste. It was an imperial financial drain of epic proportions, and you'd feel its ripples throughout the economy. Think back to the Silk Road. Each thread of silk that arrived in Rome had traveled thousands of miles, passing through numerous intermediaries, each adding their own markup. The final price in Rome was astronomical. Now multiply that by the sheer volume needed to clothe an emperor entirely in silk, to drape his palaces, to furnish his banquets, and potentially even to dress his favored courtiers. We're talking about an unprecedented outflow of Roman currency, specifically gold and silver, to the east. The Romans didn't have much to export to China that the Chinese desired in equal measure to silk, so it was largely a one-way transfer of bullion. This constant drain of precious metals was a very real concern for the imperial treasury, contributing to inflation and economic instability. You could almost feel the Roman economy slowly deflating, like a rather expensive silken balloon. Moreover, the emperor's obsession drove up the price of silk even further within the empire. When the single wealthiest individual in the known world has an insatiable demand for a rare commodity, the market responds accordingly. Merchants, knowing the emperor would pay almost anything, would undoubtedly inflate their prices. This made silk even more unattainable for anyone who wasn't Heliogabalus, further solidifying its status as an ultimate, albeit financially destructive, luxury. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which Heliogabalus's spending impacted the Roman economy, but there's little doubt it was substantial and unsustainable. It was like having a giant, silken sinkhole at the heart of the empire, constantly sucking up its precious resources. Consider also the administrative burden. Your imperial household, already a massive operation, now had to dedicate significant resources to sourcing, purchasing, and transporting vast quantities of silk. Special agents might have been dispatched to the eastern provinces, perhaps even beyond the traditional Roman borders, to secure these prized shipments. It wasn't just about money. It was about manpower and logistical effort diverted from other, arguably more pressing, imperial concerns. While Rome faced external threats and internal unrest, its emperor was arguably more concerned with whether his next shipment of chartreuse silk would arrive on time. This economic drain wasn't just abstract, it had real consequences. Less gold and silver in circulation could lead to debasement of the coinage, where emperors would reduce the precious metal content of coins, leading to inflation and a loss of public trust in the currency. It meant less money for legionary pay, for public building projects, for maintaining infrastructure. So, while you, the common citizen, might just see a ridiculously dressed emperor, you'd also feel the pinch in your own pocket, perhaps through rising prices for everyday goods. It was a stark reminder that an emperor's personal indulgence could have far-reaching and detrimental effects on the entire empire. The soft shimmer of silk hit a very hard economic truth. The emperor's unbridled passion for silk wasn't confined to his own person or his private dining rooms. It inevitably began to seep into the wider imperial court. You'd observe this shift as you navigated the bustling corridors of the Palatine Hill, witnessing firsthand how the emperor's preferences could subtly, or not so subtly, influence everyone around him. This brings us to courtly life and silk spread, where Heliogabalus's obsession became a silent, shimmering mandate for those who wished to remain in his favor. You, perhaps a courtier, a senator, or even a humble palace servant, would quickly pick up on the emperor's sartorial cues. While there was no official decree demanding silk attire for all, the message was clear. If you wanted to impress Heliogabalus, or at least avoid his displeasure, you'd do well to adopt some of his aesthetic. Imagine the subtle pressure, the unspoken expectation. You might start with a discreet silk scarf, then perhaps a tunic with silk embroidery, and before you knew it, you were investing a substantial portion of your own fortune into mimicking the imperial wardrobe. It was a classic case of keeping up with the Joneses, except the Joneses were the absolute ruler of the Roman world, and their preferred fabric cost more than your villa. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about proximity to power. Those who embraced Heliogabalus's flamboyant style were likely seen as more aligned with his vision, perhaps more modern or enlightened in his eyes. Conversely, those who stubbornly clung to traditional wools and linens might have been perceived as old-fashioned, resistant to change, or even subtly defiant. The imperial court, always a viper's nest of intrigue and ambition, now had a new, expensive layer of performative loyalty to navigate. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which courtiers willingly adopted silk versus feeling compelled to do so, but it's clear the emperor's personal taste exerted significant pressure. It's like your boss suddenly decides everyone should wear Hawaiian shirts to board meetings, and you realize your career might depend on finding the brightest one. Even the architecture and interior design of the palace began to reflect this pervasive silk aesthetic. Beyond the dining rooms, imagine audience chambers where silk banners hung from the ceilings, private apartments adorned with silk wall hangings, and even the emperor's litter, perhaps lined and draped in silk, as he was carried through the city. The very air of the imperial residence would feel softer, more luxurious, less traditionally Roman, thanks to the sheer volume of fabric present. This spread of silk, driven by a single man's preference, created a mini-economy within the court itself. Tailors skilled in working with the delicate material would have found themselves in high demand. Merchants specializing in Eastern luxuries would have flocked to Rome, eager to capitalize on the imperial trend. And somewhere, far away in the East, the silk producers probably had no idea why demand had suddenly skyrocketed from the distant Roman Empire, only that they needed to churn out more. It was a vibrant, if financially irresponsible, ecosystem of luxury, all revolving around your singular passion, Heliogabalus, the emperor who couldn't get enough of that smooth, shimmering thread. While the imperial court might have been buzzing with the rustle of new silk garments, the Roman populace, and particularly the more traditional elements of society, were definitely not buying into the trend. In fact, for many, Heliogabalus's silk obsession became a focal point for deep-seated anxieties about the direction of the empire. This brings us to the moral outcry and traditionalists, a chorus of disapproval that viewed silk as far more than just a fabric. You, as a Roman citizen with a stern sense of ancestral values, would have seen Heliogabalus's lavish silk attire as the ultimate symbol of decadence and effeminacy. The sheer transparency of some silk garments, especially those worn by men, was considered scandalous. Roman men, particularly those of the senatorial class, were supposed to be paragons of gravitas, strength, and military prowess. Their clothing was meant to be practical and dignified, reflecting their serious responsibilities. A man swathed in delicate, flowing silk, particularly in vibrant colors, was seen as weak, unmanly, and dangerously orientalized. It was a visual assault on everything they believed Rome stood for. Imagine your gruff, battle-hard hardened grandfather being told to wear a sparkly sequin jumpsuit to a formal dinner. That's the level of cultural dissonance we're talking about. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about national identity. The Romans had always prided themselves on their distinct character, their virtue, manliness. They viewed foreign influences, especially those from the perceived softness of the East, with suspicion. Silk, therefore, became a tangible representation of these fears. It symbolized the perceived corruption of Roman morals, the erosion of traditional values, and the dangerous slide into luxury and self-indulgence. The old guard would openly lament that the empire was losing its way, succumbing to the very vices that had brought down other great powers. The historians of the time, often reflecting the views of the Roman elite, are scathing in their descriptions of Heliogabalus's clothing. Dio Cassius, for example, repeatedly emphasizes the emperor's loose garments and effeminate attire, linking it directly to his perceived moral failings and unfitness to rule. These were not casual observations, they were deliberate criticisms meant to delegitimize his reign. You can almost hear the moralists clucking, shaking their heads, and muttering about the good old days when emperors wore proper, respectable togas and didn't prance around like theatrical performers in their silk finery. Historians still argue about the true motivations behind these moral condemnations. Were they genuinely concerned about Roman virtue? Or was it a convenient political tool to undermine an unpopular emperor who was also perceived as culturally alien? Perhaps a bit of both. What's clear is that the silk controversy was more than just a superficial argument about clothing. It was a proxy battle for the soul of Rome itself. The fabric became a lightning rod for all the anxieties surrounding Heliogabalus's reign. His foreignness, his unconventional religious practices, his perceived lack of respect for Roman tradition, and his overall bizarre behavior. Every silken shimmer was a fresh irritant to those who wished for a return to a simpler, more manly Rome. As the moral outcry against your silk-clad antics grew louder, Heliogabalus, the whispers in the palace corridors began to take on a more sinister tone. You see, an emperor who alienates the traditionalists, drains the treasury, and constantly flaunts perceived decadence is an emperor ripe for removal. This is where we delve into the shadowy realm of whispers of conspiracy, where the soft rustle of silk gives way to the sharp glint of daggers. You, observing from the sidelines of the imperial court, would sense the palpable tension. Discontent wasn't confined to grumpy senators. It permeated the powerful Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own personal protectors, and even his own family. Your grandmother, Julia Misa, who had so skillfully orchestrated your ascent to power, began to realize her chosen puppet was wildly out of control. Your mother, Julia Soemius, seemed increasingly powerless to rein in your eccentricities. The very people who had put you on the throne now saw you as a liability, an embarrassment, and a threat to the stability of their dynasty. It's like throwing a huge party and realizing your main guest is setting the curtains on fire with their silk-covered flambeau. The problem, from the perspective of your pragmatic relatives, was that your behavior was becoming unsustainable. Your constant focus on elegable, your endless religious ceremonies, your shocking marriages, including to a Vestal virgin, a sacrilege of epic proportions, and yes, your relentless pursuit of silk, were all eroding your legitimacy with dizzying speed. The Praetorian Guard, crucial to any emperor's survival, grew increasingly restless. They were the muscle of the empire, expected to uphold its traditions and protect its ruler. But protecting an emperor who seemed determined to humiliate himself and undermine Roman values daily was not their idea of a good time. They were soldiers, not fashion critics, but they understood when a ruler was losing the plot. Historians still argue about the exact sequence of events and the specific individuals involved in the various plots against you, Heliogabalus. Was it a single, cohesive conspiracy or a series of overlapping machinations? What's certain is that the sentiment for your removal was widespread. Julia Misa, ever the shrewd politician, realized she needed a replacement, someone more palatable, someone who could restore a semblance of order and Roman dignity. Her gaze fell upon your young cousin, Alexianus, later known as Severus Alexander. He was everything you weren't: serious, traditional, and seemingly amenable to guidance. The stage was set for a dramatic power shift. The very same grandmother who had elevated you now began to systematically undermine you, promoting Alexianus as a more suitable heir and subtly turning the Praetorians against you. You, perhaps too consumed by your silk collection and religious rituals, seemed to have been oblivious to the full extent of the danger you were in. The air thickened with unspoken threats, with glances that lingered too long, with loyalties shifting like desert sands. The soft, seductive rustle of your silk garments was now accompanied by the faint, ominous whisper of an empire preparing to discard its most flamboyant ruler. It was an imperial game of thrones, and you, the Silk Emperor, were rapidly losing allies. The whispers turned into shouts, the conspiracies into open rebellion. Your time as the silk-draped emperor, Heliogabalus, was drawing to its inevitable, dramatic, and rather inglorious close. This is the moment of the final, silken fall, where your lavish lifestyle and defiant disregard for Roman norms finally caught up with you. You're now experiencing the raw, brutal reality of Roman politics. The Praetorian Guard, whose loyalty was paramount and whose patience had worn thin, made their move. Incited by your grandmother, Julia Misa, and eager to replace you with your more amenable cousin, Severus Alexander, they turned against you. On March 11th, 222 AD, they revolted. You, Heliogabalus, along with your mother, Julia Soemius, found yourself trapped within the very palace you had filled with silk and exotic rituals. There was no escape, no grand procession to save you. no shimmering robes to protect you from the cold, hard steel of the legionaries. The details of your death are grim, but consistent across various ancient accounts, emphasizing the contempt in which you were held. You were dragged from your hiding place, perhaps a latrine, according to some sources, adding a final, humiliating touch to your end, and murdered by the enraged Praetorians. Your mother, who had shared in your excesses and supported your bizarre reign, met the same fate. Historians still argue about the exact sequence of the gruesome events that followed. Some accounts suggest your body was dragged through the streets of Rome, a final, public humiliation for an emperor who had so often paraded himself in outlandish finery. Your corpse was then thrown into the Tiber River, a final indignity, denying you even the customary imperial burial. The water, no doubt, would have washed away any lingering traces of silk, leaving only the grim reality of a power brutally taken. The irony, of course, is that the very luxuriousness you so adored became synonymous with your downfall. Your silk obsession was just one facet of a broader pattern of behavior that alienated every significant power block in Rome: the military, the traditional aristocracy, and even your own family. Your perceived effeminacy, symbolized by your love of silk, contrasted starkly with the virile image expected of a Roman emperor, making your removal almost a foregone conclusion. You had pushed the boundaries too far, too fast, and the empire, ever resistant to profound change, pushed back with lethal force. Your successor, Severus Alexander, immediately set about undoing your reforms, attempting to restore Roman traditions and financial stability. The Black Stone of Elagabal was removed from its prominent position on the Palatine Hill. The elaborate, silk-draped rituals were abandoned. Rome breathed a collective sigh of relief, hoping to put the bizarre interlude of the Silk Emperor behind them. Yet, the memory lingered, a cautionary tale of imperial excess and the dangerous allure of a fabric that could seemingly warp an emperor's judgment. Your reign, though brief, left an indelible, if scandalous, mark on Roman history, forever associating your name with unbounded luxury and a final, spectacular, silken demise. So, you've witnessed the rise and spectacular fall of Heliogabalus, the Roman emperor who made silk his defining, and ultimately, undoing, passion. His brief but unforgettable reign left a peculiar scar on the Roman psyche, shaping not just how they viewed emperors, but also how they perceived luxury itself. This leads us to consider the enduring legacy of silk and excess, and how Heliogabalus inadvertently cemented silk's reputation for both sublime luxury and dangerous moral decline. For the Romans who came after, Heliogabalus became the ultimate cautionary tale. He was the emperor who had dared to be too foreign, too religious in the wrong way, and critically for our story, too extravagant with his silks. His image, as transmitted through historical accounts, became inextricably linked with the very fabric he adored. When future Romans thought of shocking excess, of un-Roman behavior, the image of Heliogabalus, resplendent and shimmering, possibly translucent, silk, was likely conjured. He turned silk from a mere status symbol into a symbol of imperial folly. This association with Heliogabalus's extreme behavior solidified the conservative view that silk was not just expensive, but morally suspect. It wasn't merely a neutral luxury. It was a fabric that carried connotations of effeminacy, decadence, and even instability. While the Roman elite continued to desire and acquire silk, because, let's be honest, it was still incredibly beautiful and rare, they perhaps did so with a little more discretion, a touch less flamboyant display. Keenly aware of the historical precedent of the Silk Emperor, it was a subtle shift, but a significant one. You could still wear silk, but maybe don't wrap your entire house in it. Historians still argue about the long-term impact of Heliogabalus's reign on Roman attitudes towards luxury. Did it genuinely curb imperial extravagance, or was it a temporary blip before the next wave of excesses? What's clear is that his story provided a powerful historical narrative against unchecked indulgence. His name became a byword for a ruler whose personal desires completely overshadowed his duties to the state. The memory of his silks, shimmering in the Roman sun, served as a vivid reminder that even the most beautiful things, when pursued to an extreme, could lead to ruin. Think about how this played out in the popular imagination. Parents might have warned their children about becoming another Heliogabalus, perhaps focusing on his perceived laziness or his weird religious practices, but almost certainly mentioning his penchant for outlandish clothing. The idea that luxury, particularly foreign luxury like silk, could soften the Roman spirit and lead to weakness, found a concrete example in his reign. His legacy wasn't just about his fall, it was about the way his personal preferences became weaponized against him, symbolizing a broader societal anxiety. The soft embrace of silk had hidden a very sharp edge, and Rome remembered it. Even centuries later, the name Heliogabalus would evoke images of an emperor lost in a world of shimmering, dangerous indulgence. So, you've journeyed through the rise and fall of the emperor who lived and, effectively, died by silk. But our story isn't just about one eccentric ruler. It's also about the enduring appeal of the fabric itself, and how, despite the scandals of Heliogabalus, its mystique continued to captivate civilizations long after the Roman Empire faded. We now turn to silk's enduring allure, tracing its journey beyond Rome and its lasting significance in the human story. Even after the memory of Heliogabalus became a distant, uncomfortable echo in Roman history, silk continued its inexorable flow from east to west. Its desirability was simply too fundamental, its qualities too exceptional, to be permanently tarnished by one emperor's excesses. The softness, the strength, the beautiful drape, the way it held dye, no other fabric could quite compare. It wasn't just clothing, it was art, an investment, a symbol of refinement that transcended eras and cultures. You can still feel the draw of it today, can't you? That cool, smooth sensation against your skin, even just in your imagination. As the Roman Empire eventually fragmented, silk didn't disappear. It found new patrons, new trade routes, and new ways to weave itself into the fabric of other burgeoning empires. The Byzantine Empire, Rome's eastern successor, became a major hub for silk production and trade, eventually even developing its own silk industry, finally breaking China's ancient monopoly. From there, silk spread to the Islamic world, where it was transformed into breathtaking tapestries and garments, and eventually back into Western Europe during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, often carried by Venetian merchants or returning crusaders. Historians still argue about the precise role silk played in cultural exchange beyond its economic impact. Did its journey along the Silk Road foster deeper understanding between disparate peoples, or was it simply a commodity? What's certain is that it facilitated interaction, however fleeting, between vastly different worlds. It was the original global luxury good, connecting East and West in a continuous, shimmering thread of commerce and fascination. And even as new materials emerged, none ever truly eclipsed silk's unique status. Think of silk's continued presence in our world today. From haute couture runways to everyday scarves, from luxurious bedding to delicate surgical sutures, silk remains prized for its unique properties. It is still a symbol of elegance, comfort, and refined taste. Its production, though industrialized in some respects, still relies on the humble silkworm, a tiny creature whose delicate secretions have shaped human history, driven empires, and even, briefly, consumed an emperor. The story of Heliogabalus, the Roman emperor who only wore silk, is a quirky footnote in this grand narrative, a flamboyant testament to the fabric's immense power to captivate and, sometimes, to complicate. It reminds us that even in the most rigid societies, personal obsessions can leave a surprising and memorable mark. The journey of silk, from the distant mulberry leaves to the imperial palaces, whispers of grand adventures and quiet luxury. As we dim the lights and prepare to drift into slumber, let the soft imagined brush of silk be a comforting thought, a quiet reminder of history's fascinating quirks and the enduring beauty of things that stand the test of time. Just like this ancient, luxurious thread, let the rustle of history fade into the gentle hum of the night, carrying you softly into dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.